Call this Board of Adjustment meeting for Thursday, June 20th, 2019 in session. Can we get a roll call, please?
Chair Madrid.
Present.
Vice Chair Jenna.
Present.
Board Member Browning.
Present.
Board Member Holland.
Present.
Board Member Hummer.
Present.
Board Member Johnson.
Present.
Board Member Mitchell.
Present.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'll ask everyone to please rise for our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This time we'll move to the approval of tonight's agenda. Do we have any discussion on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we can move forward to the approval of the minutes. Would anyone like to discuss the approval of the minutes, or do we have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes of May 16, 2019 regular meeting of the Littleton Board of Adjustment.
We have a motion by Mr. Jenner. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a second by Mr. Johnson. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? And the motion passes unanimously. We will now move forward to our public comment section of tonight's meeting. This is an opportunity for anyone from the public to comment on general business and or non-agenda related items. If you have any comments related to any of tonight's cases, there will be an opportunity to have your comments heard during the public hearing portion of tonight's meeting. We have the list here. Seeing no names on the list, I'll ask again if there's anyone who'd like to speak during the public comment portion of tonight's meeting who didn't get a chance to sign in. And seeing none, we'll move forward to general business. Do we have any general business on the board or anyone? Nope. All right, we're just moving right along tonight. So we'll now move forward to our public hearing portion of tonight's meeting. Tonight we have one case for our public hearing, case number VAR 19-0006, which includes variances for a property located at 5521 South Nevada Street to allow 2 single-family houses on a single lot and to reduce a rear and side setback for a principal structure. Is our applicant here tonight? Wonderful. Thank you for coming tonight. We'll begin with a presentation by city staff, followed by comments from our applicant, and then we will open the floor to anyone who would like to provide comments on the case. Each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes to provide their testimony on the case. Mr. Ansag, are you ready?
I am.
The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Chairperson Madrid, the board. Thank you. So presenting tonight for Resolution 08-2019. There are 2 requests tonight, 2 packages of requests. One is the variance to the requirements for maximum number of principal structures to allow 2 single-family detached principal structures on the lot, with a variance to the rear yard setback, which is established for principal structures from 20 feet to 8 feet, and then a variance to the south yard setback from 10 feet to 4 feet. The other, in case that does not move forward, the applicant would like to request a variance for a new garage in the rear yard for the driveway requirement from 20 feet. He's requesting 8 feet, and staff is recommending a reduction to 10 feet on that. So I will go over the application details, review of the criteria and analysis, and staff recommendation, and then board action. The property is located at 5521 South Nevada, and the property currently has a detached garage that is accessed from the street. The applicant would like to remove and replace that garage. Apparently it's in not great shape, and build a new garage with a accessory dwelling unit or a carriage house over top. The result would be 2 principal structures on the lot. And then alternatively, without the dwelling unit, just requests a new garage with a reduction in the driveway requirement. So the applicant provided these sketches and renderings. So there's the proposed view of the new garage with dwelling unit from the northwest, from the north, and from the west alley. These are preliminary sketches, so compliance with things like the downtown design standards and other things would be done at the time of building permit were this to be approved by the board. So the criteria, the first being that the variance will not authorize the operation of a use other than those specifically listed as the primary permitted uses. So the zone district for this property is R5, which is the multiple family zone district, and single family detached uses are allowed in that zone district. And so even that principal use would remain and would not change. The second requirement is that the variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or zone district in which the property is located, or permanently impair the allowed use or development of adjacent property. So staff believes that the carriage houses may have implications for community character, but this would be better addressed by Planning Commission with all the deference to the Board of Adjustment, but Planning Commission and Council as a citywide legislative code change that would allow accessory dwelling units or carriage houses, things like that, in either all zone districts or in select zone districts, but that would be better put forward by Planning Commission and Council to make that code change. With that said, carriage houses may be appropriate in the downtown area and the R5 zone where multiple dwelling units are allowed as a principal use. And then for an alternative analysis for the garage without the dwelling unit, there's many garages that are within 10 feet or even less of the property lines towards the alleys. So a reduction to 10 feet from the alley would not alter the essential character. And neither of these would, we believe, would hinder the development of surrounding properties. Analysis of different garages just even within the alley of the proposed shows any number of lengths from that alley. So this would fit within that character. The third is that the variance is the minimum that will afford relief and is the least possible modification to the provision in question. So the provision from the code is that you cannot have two single-family principal structures on a lot. However, the R5 zone district, in fact, would allow two separate duplex structures. So with that said, the lot and its current configuration probably wouldn't accommodate that, especially with the additional parking requirements. So there's the possibility that the applicant could move forward with an attached dwelling unit, in essence making this a duplex, rather than going with the detached configuration. As noted in the staff report, this doesn't take into consideration building code, structural issues that may arise in that, but it is, it is possible, potentially. With that said, as far as the garage and the reduction of the driveway requirement, based on the size of the lot, the configuration, staff does believe that some reduction from that 20-foot driveway requirement is appropriate in this case. 4, that the variance will not adversely affect the public health, safety, and welfare. So the building codes reasonably assure that duplexes are safe, and even a detached carriage house would be held to building code standards. And so, there's adequate turning radius and things like that as well, with a garage at 10 feet or even 8 feet for that instance. So staff's analysis finds that the requests will not adversely impact public health, safety, or welfare. And 5, that the hardship, if any, under which the variance is sought was not created by the owner, occupant, or agent, and was not suffered as a result of any violation. So this is one of those questions of, are there alternatives? One being just attaching an additional dwelling unit to the principal structure as it stands. But as far as the creation of the lot, this is one of the oldest subdivisions in Littleton, and so this was created long before the applicant ever acquired that property. So to the configuration and size of the lot, that was certainly not created by the applicant. But there's possible alternatives, so the question of hardship is a question in staff's mind in this case for the multiple dwelling units. But then again, we do believe that there is some reduction in that driveway requirement from 20 feet to 10 feet. For the way the resolution was drafted, it was drafted with Exhibit A as an option for the board to review and approve, and then Option B, or Exhibit B. So Exhibit A is the garage structure with the dwelling unit, and staff did not find it met all of the requirements. However, the detached garage without the dwelling unit and the reduction of the driveway requirement would in fact meet the requirements for a variance. And so the rear setback for an accessory structure in the R5 zone is 10 feet from an alley. And so staff is recommending a reduction to 10 feet. And with that, staff is more than willing to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Onsager. Does anyone on the board have any questions for staff at this point? All right, seeing none, we will call our applicant up to make any comments on behalf of their project. And if you could please state your name.
Certainly. Let me plug in here, hold on. See if this works. Oh, there we go. Oh, hold on. Does that work? Sorry, I have to adjust my screen again. Sorry, Tyler, we just figured this out. Hold on. Oh, it's so weird.
We had you on the screen before.
Yeah, well, we just tested it.
Yeah.
Well, what I can do, maybe I can do this. Is that going to be big enough? Can you guys see that?
I could do that. Does anyone on the board have
Ish.
any?
A little bit?
Oh, looks like we have
See
Tyler
that.
coming back down here.
Tech support.
What'd you do? It might be easier for me to navigate it.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Where are you trying to go?
Go ahead and go to your settings like you were before, and then go ahead and change that to
So, because then I turned it on,
Yeah.
maybe we need to kick. And then, there we go.
that should work.
What kind of magic is this?
Yeah, we can try.
Yeah, I got the first line.
All right, we might just have to do that.
Everyone see that on the screen?
We tested it before and it worked fine, so.
I think we could all see that one.
All right, awesome, awesome.
Good, we're good here.
All right, hey, my name's Tyler Hardy, long-term resident here. I'm going to go fast, obviously only about like 10 minutes-ish. Grew up in this neighborhood, went to Littleton High School, love this community, taking an active interest in it. I'm actually on the newly formed Transportation Mobility Board, so appreciate all of your guys' service and for the neighbors and friends that came along. I appreciate you guys coming out. So just kind of jump right into this. Really want to go over the project background today, kind of how it came to fruition, talk about some of the community considerations I had going through this project, and then obviously we're going to get into the variances that are being requested. So a little bit about the property. So number one, I'm not a developer. This is my only home. Love living here. It's a single family home, a little less than 2,000 square feet. As they mentioned, it's zoned R5 multifamily, meaning that you can build a duplex, triplex, quadplex there. As far as density goes, that kind of development is permitted. And then as it relates to this project of building a new garage, there is that existing garage there that has about a 5-foot setback from the rear property line and side south property line. So a little project background. So the last 12, 24 months have been a living hell living here. I'm the only one that had borders directly to the Nevada apartment complex construction. And unfortunately, due to the height that was permitted there, the entire south side of my property, particularly that driveway, receives virtually zero sunlight during the winter. That driveway becomes a giant sheet of ice, and it's really not that safe, for one. And then to add insult to injury, if you guys can kind of see, there's that large tree there. That was a giant elm tree on our property. It was about 60 feet tall, and it was on our property. The developer thought it was in his way, and so he trespassed our property, cut it down, virtually removing any privacy opportunity we had from the 6 bedrooms, 2 hallways, and community patio that overlooks directly into our bedroom, into our living room, and into our kitchen. So when we were looking at the development of this project, we were trying to think of creative ways of how we can create a little bit more privacy and hopefully have some sun left in our yard. That was one thing. And then from a functionality and utility perspective, effectively, a little less than a third of my property is dedicated to a driveway and a garage in which only one car can park in at any given time. There's only one way in and one way out. So as a result, you'll see on the road here, there was some fancy animations, but now I don't have the fancy animations. But a second car between my girlfriend and I, one of us is always parking on the road. And then because there's a curb cut, there's a another parking space that, that effectively nobody can use. So it's really not an efficient layout. So going into, the project goals and considerations, we wanted to build a 2-car garage with access from the alleyway so that we could get rid of the driveway itself and get rid of the giant ice sheet. And then we figured that would substantially improve the utility and the functionality of the garage and the driveway. Also, we wanted to take advantage of the R5 zoning, which all of the developers in our neighborhood are. We're seeing all the development down there with all the multi-units. We wanted to be able to take advantage of that and provide an affordable housing unit on top of the garage. Third, I've sat in a lot of these public hearings for a lot of the development. The number one complaint I hear from everybody is parking. And so we wanted to be one of the few plans that brought and increased parking back to the city. And then lastly, wanted to keep a single family home from getting destroyed again. So we wanted to keep the aesthetics and the feel of the property. So the proposed site plan, you guys have obviously seen this. So here, the Nevada Street is on the right-hand side. The alleyway is on the left-hand side. As you can see, the driveway has been removed. Therefore, that curb cut is being returned to a standard curb, and there's a parking space being added back to the city. From a practicality standpoint, now we're able to park 2 cars in the garage, so technically there's at least 2 parking spots being added to the city. And then there's also an additional 2 parking spaces that are uncovered, provided just north of the garage there. So that's kind of the high-level site plan. Here are the renderings, and again, and I appreciate what you said, this is a $9 video game I put together just to show proof of concept. This style and all that stuff, not attached to it. And I know that I was involved in looking at all the changes for the new recommendations and the building requirements. So I'm happy to work with the city to make sure that the final product is aligned and congruent with the standards that are coming down range. So here's kind of a view from the alleyway. You guys have, I don't have that. There's a view from the side. And then the proposed site plan, northeast, if you can kind of tell for scale, that building in the background right there, so that's a community patio that looks directly into the yard. That's the community patio on the apartment complex. So getting into the variances that are being requested, there's 3 of them. One, there's the rear setback, which he discussed, the side setback, and then obviously the third, the bamboozle, the second family, single family detached structure. So we're going to kind of knock out all 3 real quick. The rear setback, as he kind of said, this is a commonplace variance. What's required is 20, what's existing is 5. I'm looking to increase it to 10. So that should be kind of a no-brainer. The south side garage setback variance, so this is on the side of the property. I want to highlight something here. So my original plans actually met the setback requirement of 10 feet. I was shocked to find out that I'm required to produce twice as much parking as all the development around me. So the slot homes that are 1 block south of me, which are 2,800 square foot, 4-bedroom, 5-bathroom units, only required 1 parking space. The apartment complex next to me, 62 multi-bedroom units, only required 1.25 parking spaces. For some reason, I'm required to produce 2, which just from a resident feedback is really frustrating. So if I was only required to do 1 which is effectively a loft and about 500 square feet, I wouldn't have to request this additional variance. And then the last variance, obviously the big one, the second single-family detached structure. I wanted to highlight a couple of things, and Carl's been great to work with, and Michael and the whole team. But I wanted to kind of go into the reason of the denial, and starting with that the variance alters the essential character of the neighborhood. I take issue with this only because effectively the city would approve me bulldozing my home and building an attached duplex. And I find it really confusing on how that is less altering than my plans. You can currently, this is a second point, you can build on top of your garage today without a variance. So as long as you don't include a bathroom or a kitchen, you can build on top of it. This is happening a block away from us right now, and it's actually, there's multiple properties that have this done, right? So that's one way you can actually, I could build this building as long as it didn't have a kitchen or bathroom, no problem. I could also just build a hallway through the middle of the yard and attach it, and there would be no variance required. And I understand it's an unintended consequence of the code, but it kind of shows you the silliness of the code as it exists. Obviously, some of it's older and some of it's newer, but the recommendation, just from a resident, it kind of feels like the recommendation is developers can and residents can't. On the second notion that and I appreciate the recommendation that they provided of attaching the garage to the building. Unfortunately, I disagree that this provides the least possible modification, and I want to kind of highlight why. So for one, I've gotten costing on all of this stuff, and attaching it's going to increase the cost for me. I have a garden level basement, so I would have to effectively board up all of my windows that face west that get sunlight into the basement. In order to attach the garage, I would have to board all of those up, removing more sunlight from my property. There's a huge strategic advantage of having this unit on the south side of my property, as close to the apartment complex as possible, because the way that the sun goes, don't you do that? There we go. The way that the sun goes, that north side is the only side that gets sun. So if I attach the garage, basically I'm forced to have no yard in the back. My only yard is going to be one that's just literally visible from other people's bedrooms. I'll have no privacy and no sunlight. And so for me, these are a lot of burdens that I didn't put onto myself. And so it's kind of frustrating to run into them. And last note, and I appreciate what they're saying about carriage houses and that, maybe it requires a larger, city thought towards it. But I wanted to highlight something. This is not a large precedent that's being asked. This kind of development is happening right now in a slightly different form factor, and we're splitting hairs. People are able to build on top of their garages right now. People are allowed to have this kind of density, and it's really just talking about a marriage of the two that allows single-family homeowners to actually be able to develop their homes and take advantage of R5 without demolishing their homes. So I think it's a really, really attractive option for a lot of residents, and I'd like you guys to take that consideration. And lastly, I just want to kind of touch on something. I've had the brunt end of bad developers, and when I went through this project, I made sure I was going house to house, particularly for those that were going to be most effective, potentially affected by the development. And I wanted to make sure that the plans were something that they supported. And if they didn't support it, I wouldn't have done it. I was overwhelmed by the amount of support that everybody gave. They saw this as wow, this could be a great vehicle for us to be able to do things on our property. And they expressed extreme frustration with the amount of variances I was being forced to apply for just to build something simple. Particularly, we sit in the big shadow of this massive development there. So the biggest thing I would ask is that, I knocked on all these doors. I shared these plans and got support from all of these households. Mine's the one right in the middle next to that empty lot, which is no longer empty. And I would just like to ask you all to understand that the community as a whole, I think we've struggled with a lot of the development in the area. There's been a lot of, negativity, and there's been a lot of plans that people strictly opposed that got passed anyways for one reason or another. And here, at least I feel locally in this little area, there's a lot of support behind this. And I think that means something. And residents want to make sure that they have a vehicle to move forward. I know that there's been a lot of variances, and we've kind of tried to change the process, but it kind of feels like the variances were open for developers, now they've shut on residents. It's just kind of how it feels. So unintended, intended, understand. So anyways, we appreciate your time, and thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Do we have any comments or questions for our applicant tonight? And there'll be another opportunity to do so once we have public comment, but just right up front, if anyone has any comments or questions that they'd like to clarify with our applicant.
I'm going to ask this of
Mr.
Carl.
Mitchell, yes.
Yes, I'm going to ask this of Carl also. What's your understanding if you were to develop this for maximum density or sell a property, how many units could be placed, how many living units could be placed on this property?
So it comes down to square footage of the lot, and I will get my calculator up and running, but I would defer. 5 seems like a reasonable number, but I will confirm that.
5 versus proposed 2.
Proposed to, but given the constraints of the site, feasibility is certainly would be an issue.
Could be 4.
Could be 4, could be 3, depending on,
More
with
than,
enough money and enough structured parking, you could always do something, but,
Exactly.
more than 2.
lifts or something. But no, but yeah, I believe the limit would be 5 based on the densities.
More than 2. Okay, thanks.
I do have a question for our applicant
Yes.
tonight. So in the Littleton City Code, under number of principal structures, under 10.4.1 in the zoning, going over number of principal structures, the number of principal structures permitted on any single lot of record shall be limited as follows. And then it says for single-family dwellings, not more than one principal structure per lot in R5. And the way to increase the number of principal structures on a lot would be to go through the STP or PD zone district or a PDO process. Was that brought up by city staff as a alternative to this direction that we're going in front of the Board of Adjustment as opposed to going through a PDO? Or would Mr. Onsager like to jump in
So
on
I
this
would
one?
like to interject. So the PDO process was in fact removed for residential properties in
Okay.
2018. STP was actually not a typo. That stands for Scientific and Technology Park.
Right.
So.
I'm not doing that.
Yeah,
Not through the SDP
Or
process,
can be,
but,
does that get me approved?
and.
just how the code was written.
Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
qualify for a PD amendment or a PD because of the acreage doesn't meet the rezoning requirements.
So with the Board of Adjustment not being able to change the use of a property going from single-family to having 2 single-family units, would the Board of Adjustment have that authority to grant a second single-family dwelling as opposed to having the applicant go through a rezoning to allow for that? So with the Board of Adjustment not having the authority to change the use of a property, would this not count as a change of use in terms of adding a second primary dwelling on a lot? Or would that be more geared toward a rezoning of the property itself and having that go through Planning Commission?
I think I understand your question. The Board of Adjustment does not have authority to change the zoning.
Correct.
Or the use. So I think that was one of staff's points. To the extent that the applicant would like certain things changed, maybe the more appropriate way to do that is to go to council and ask for a zoning change rather than a variance change.
Okay.
Because only council can change the zoning as to how that goes. And as the zoning is written now, it would say a single structure could have as many as 5 units. But, I guess that's what Mr. Onsager is saying. But because this is 2 structures, it's different than what the code would provide.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
I think I understood your question. I hope you understand my answer.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question? I don't know if I can. Maybe I can't.
If you could address the board, that'd be great.
Yes. So the question would be, as far as the use goes, because I know where you're going with this, and I've kind of thought about the same thing. Is there a change in the use? And I think that's really the question, because the use of the property isn't really changing. It's just the form, the actual format of it, like it's the form factor. But the use, if you can put a duplex there and you can have 3 people living there and the use is a dwelling unit, I don't know if that, I'm trying to articulate that, but does that make sense? Like, are we changing the use? And I don't know the answer to that. I was just more curious of what your guys' take was.
Okay. Another question for the applicant, if you don't mind. I saw a couple mock-ups of the dwelling unit on top of the garage. Did you have any of just the garage, or was it just the garage that's going to be there?
No,
as is?
effectively, yeah. If it was just a garage, the short answer is no. And effectively, if it was just a garage, it would just be just a garage.
Is it going to change at all what's out there, or just kind of keep what you got there?
It wouldn't have the second story, obviously.
Correct.
But yeah, as far as like the rough square footage and the form of it, that would be what I would look for.
What's the proposed height of this structure that you're showing here?
I don't have necessarily a proposed height, and there's actually some ambiguity there, only because when you have an accessory dwelling unit, there's an 18-foot height requirement. But if this is considered a second detached single-family dwelling unit, I'm actually unsure of what the height restriction would be. With that said, I'm going into this like open-minded, knowing that I can meet either requirement, and I'd be happy to meet the more restrictive, ADU requirement of 18 feet.
How tall is your garage right now?
Oh man, I don't know. I really don't know. Like at the apex, maybe
Staff?
12 feet?
Typical detached garages are 15 feet
Okay,
typically.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how tall would, with the accessory dwelling on top of that, how tall would that be allowed to go?
As a principal structure, that would be subject to the zone district requirement of 30 feet.
30 feet?
Yep.
Okay.
It would be much less than that.
If it
But, yeah.
were an accessory structure, which is allowed right now, because right now the city does not allow accessory dwelling units.
Correct.
As an accessory structure, the height limit would be 18 feet.
Okay. So because the city doesn't allow for accessory dwelling units, this would be another primary single-family dwelling allowed up to 30 feet.
Correct.
But left just as it is, it'd be around 15 feet, but the maximum would be 18, correct?
Correct.
Wonderful. Does anyone have any other questions for our applicant?
I have one.
tonight? Mr. Johnson?
Did staff tell you that you could put a breezeway between the two of them to make it one structure?
It was kind of mentioned, and that's why I brought up the hallway. I'm unclear as to exactly what that breezeway, like what's the definition of that breezeway. If it has to be, totally closed and covered, I'm not the largest fan of it just because it looks a little goofy. But if it's something that could look attractive, like a pergola, like over a sidewalk or, some sort of breezeway like that, definitely be open. My fear of having a fully enclosed breezeway is that it effectively goes right through the yard and segregates the yard into two different things. And aesthetically, like that to me is like not where the, neighborhood should be going. But I think we kind of briefly talked about it.
So what's the answer then?
So
Yes or no?
the, for attachment of principal structures, question has come up in different ways, and the take is that the attachment has to be habitable space, and so an open breezeway would not necessarily meet that standard, whereas something that is enclosed, habitable, subject to occupancy standards in the building code, things like that would constitute attachment of principal structures.
Basically, it would have to be a dry structure, a dry.
Correct, yeah.
Right, with no other questions from the board for applicant? Thank you very much. Mr. Jenner?
Yeah, you showed two different pictures of the property. One of which is there was a open space, or at least a space that wasn't developed. What's in there right now?
Oh, what was built next to me?
Yeah.
An apartment complex that's like 42 feet high, 62 units, 120 something people. The community patio that's services the entire building is basically the second floor that looks directly into my property. And then there's, if I recount, there's 6 bedrooms that look directly into the property. Even the ground level ones are taller than the 6-foot privacy fence. And so, yeah, it's lovely.
Okay, and so is that, I guess I asked this to the staff, is that still in R5 zone?
So the structure directly adjacent to the south is actually zone PDR. Littleton Crossing is PDR.
Plan development residential.
Planned development residential, so it's subject to the specific zone requirements established by that PD document. Or
And that was
planned
rezoned a
development
few years ago, wasn't it? Just
That was-
recently?
It was rezoned, yeah.
in '06, I believe.
Yep.
And it wasn't built until recently.
You also, you surveyed your neighbors, and looks to me like you apparently have gotten support from a good portion of those. Are they planning to do the same type of change to their property?
No, none of them immediately or anything like that, I think, and they're here to speak, and they can definitely chime in, but they all own different types of homes. You know, Michelle over here, she owns a duplex, so there's really no room to do it. Other people, Jim and Jan are my neighbors next door. You know, they have a single-family home. They're the ones immediately next door to me, so I don't want to speak for them, but, you know, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hardy, would increasing the size of your garage with an accessory unit create more shade in your backyard? And those 2 extra parking spaces north of your proposed structure, wouldn't those kind of fall into the same pitfalls as your driveway that you currently have on the south side of your property?
They would, unfortunately. And again, if I wasn't required to have 2, you know, I'm not exactly sure. It may not, in the sense of where the apartment complex is and where the sun falls on the back side of the property. There's a lot more sun exposure just because it's on the tail end when the sun is warmest. So I can tell you right now that corner side of my lot, so that would be the northwest side, is the one where all of the snow melts first.
Okay.
But that would change with another structure.
There's a garage there now with roughly the same height, so I can't speak to exactly what it would change, but ideally what would be happening is that at least the yard area would have enough sun exposure, especially from like kind of like 1 o'clock to 3:30, 4 o'clock. It would actually provide, you know, sun.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I think that's all we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr. Hardy.
everybody.
And I have an update from a previous question, if you do not mind. So the allowed dwelling units per the density in the R5 for this lot would be 4.8. So it would be 4 units or 4 allowed dwelling units per that density.
Thank you.
But it wouldn't be, typically it wouldn't be single-family dwellings, correct? It'd be duplexes or 2-family homes?
That would be duplexes or a fourplex.
Or a 4-plex, yeah.
Yep. Or if they lot configured, could be 2 separate duplex structures. But the total number of additional dwelling units could be up to 4.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much.
Thank you,
may have
everybody.
a seat. I'll now open the public comment for case number VAR 19-0006 at 7:10 PM tonight. And we have a list of people who would like to come up to speak. So we'll just go in order that everyone signed in. We have Janet and Jim Buntrock. Buntrock.
Thanks for your time. Janet Buntrock, Jim and I live next door to Tyler, directly to the north of him. We are the ones most impacted. Our houses were built in the 40s. His garage needs replaced. Mine is a little bit different structure, but it's also 75 years old. So I don't have any funds to replace my garage. I don't have any intention. But I would like to know that that would be a possibility sometime. As far as to the flavor of the neighborhood is eclectic. We have the monstrosity that is directly to the south of us, the Nevada structure, the 62 units. Directly to the west of us is Lumalandra's giant plantation-size home. And the house directly to north of me, 5501, has just been sold to be redeveloped. So there's very few single-family homes. We'd like to keep them. I love living in downtown. Like Tyler, I'm a lifetime resident. I've been in downtown Littleton for 29 years. My husband and I have. And he's right, those gigantic buildings that are coming in make our backyards fish bowls. The new development also looks into my kitchen window. So there's about 5 windows that from their second and third and first floor look directly into my kitchen. Anything that would provide a little buffer would be of a benefit. But I would like to see the mindset change to favor residents. It feels like Tyler said that if you're a realtor and you have really deep pockets, it goes through. The rezoning actually on Nevada happened in 2013, not 2006, in 2013. The building commission here in downtown Littleton, that hearing went until 11:30 at night. The building commission voted no on the 61 units. City council overrode that. It was meant to be 31 and it became 61. So there's a kind of a problem there with that. The parking requirement, parking is a ridiculous issue downtown. If you come to my house on a Thursday night, we have to both park in the driveway. Our parking spaces are gone. Tyler is providing more parking. It is kind of a crazy place to live. We love living downtown. We made the decision to stay. I'd like to see more single-family homes stay. I'd like to see Tyler be able to get the variances. The driveways, when you walk the alley, Lou Melandra's house, which is directly behind mine, his carport goes to his fence line. It isn't 5 feet to the alley, and that's been allowed. So it makes sense to me to allow a longtime Littleton resident to continue to upkeep his home and to keep that town of downtown Littleton what makes us precious and sweet and makes it feel like an old town. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on our list, we have Pam Chadbourne.
Good evening. My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live in the next block from here. Well said by Janet. But I am going to have one exception with my neighbors, and that is that this isn't the right way to do this. But this site has been horribly abused, and so has our block, by the replacement of what used to be St. Mary's Catholic School on both sides of the street with 29 and 31 dwelling units in the first place. That shouldn't have been done. And then, as Janet mentioned, that rezoning from 31 to actually 72, they only built 61 or something like that, was abominable. So this site is entitled to do this because the city violated their rights 6 years ago and 13 years ago. And that's wrong. So this site should have this ability to do this. I don't think that goes beyond this site. I don't think this should be licensed for other neighbors to be able to consider this or to consider this as allowing the neighborhood to change in that way. Each site needs to be considered, and Tyler did a great job of pointing out why his site has been so horribly changed by the neighboring structure. And by the way, Mr. Jenna, this is a massive block. It's a monolith, 3 stories high. There are no openings for sunlight. There's no openings for birds to fly or trees to be built. It is wrong in this neighborhood. It never should have been allowed. So I live in the next block. Please don't, I mean, maybe I'm speaking against my own interests, but please don't consider this license or precedent. Please make that clear. This is appropriate for this site. If other people want to do this, please make them come to whatever board is appropriate to ask for it. What was done here was wrong, and the city, I hope that you will take away a message that the original violation here was done by the boards and commissions of the city. Please, as was brought up, think of the residents, not in terms of just giving us carte blanche, but at least on this site, giving them permission to do what they're asking. Thanks very much. Oh, and by the way, Tyler did talk to the neighbors. It doesn't show up in the packet like a neighborhood meeting, but I went around and did a quick survey of the people who are most affected. And yeah, they're all for it. Again, because the major change in this neighborhood is this massive monolith, no breaks, 3 stories high, which, by the way, shades during the major part of the day. And that's what the problem is with the driveway. It blocks the whole middle part of the day's sun on his driveway, on his current driveway. So let that sun melt the ice on the new proposed parking places. It would be fine. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. That was the last name on our list tonight. But I would like to, yes, just real quickly. I'll ask again if there's anyone who would like to speak during public comment for this case who is in here who didn't get a chance to sign in. If you could please state your name for us,
My name is
please.
Michelle McNally. Thank you all for your time.
One second, how do you spell your last name?
Oh, McNally. And Mike and I have lived in Littleton for 30-plus years, but we recently downsized and bought a duplex across the street from Tyler. And I think the other neighbors have voiced, I can't say it any better with the apartment complex. It's just awful in our parking. So the fact that Tyler, who has a single-family home, which I think adds to the charm and character, even though I'm in a tall duplex, but just the character of the neighborhood where there's a mix is a real plus. And I love Jan's garage. I hope she never tears that down. I just am in full support of allowing this variance. It makes no sense that the big developers are able to put these units in with one parking space for 2 bedrooms, and Tyler, who's doing a 500 square foot carriage house above his garage, is not permitted to do it. It sets a bad precedent for favoring large developers over single family homes, which I think it's nice to have a little bit of a mix in there. So I'm very much in support of Tyler being able to move forward with the garage. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Hi, I'm Mike McNally, same spelling.
Thank you.
And I'm at 5512 as well, and also have a place off of South Perry Street, which is just up in Littleton as well, off of Lowell. I agree with all the comments that have been made. Tyler, before he even thought about doing this, surveyed his neighbors, including me, showed me exactly what he was doing. He's not a developer. You know, he understands, and I think all of you do, that he could sell the place and try and get a bunch of duplexes on it. Didn't want to do that. He did lose a beautiful tree, and I will second his thoughts on that because of the huge complex that was built next door. He lost shade, and I can vouch for that because I slipped on his driveway one time when I went to see his dog. So he did lose a lot of shade. He lost privacy, sunlight, and he's not asking for much. And I think given what's happened next door, where they were allowed to build this huge place next to his, and he lost privacy, sunlight, and other things, he's not asking for much. And I don't personally feel that asking for this type of variance is going to open some kind of floodgates. I think everyone else is going to have to come in front of you guys and give an explanation as to why they're doing it. And so I really support Tyler and hope that this passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, just another last call for anyone who wasn't able to sign in on the sign-in sheet for public comment for this case. Seeing no one, I'll now close the public comment for case variance 19-0006 at 7:21 p.m. At this time, we'll begin discussion of the case, adding any general comments for the benefit of other board members, or to give the opportunity to the board.
Chair, we need a motion before you can discuss.
Usually you allow the staff and the applicant to rebut or to respond to anything that the public, that was said at the public hearing.
Absolutely.
If they choose to. They don't have to, but usually that's offered.
All right, so this will be the time. So public comment is still open at this point. All right.
The public hearing is still open, but only for a response from the staff or the applicant from anything that was said in the public comment.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Learn something new each time, right?
We'll have some training on this in a little bit.
Great. Well, at this point, I will, let's start with staff. If they have any additional comments to any of the comments that were said here at the public comment section.
Has listened and will take into consideration all of the things said during the public comment period by everybody involved, but has no further comment at this time.
Thank you very much. Any comments from our applicant in terms of anything that was said during public comment? All right. So at this point, do I need a motion to close public comment? Wonderful. Do we have that motion?
Well, we've already closed the public comment, but we just need a motion and a second, and then
And you
there
have
can be
discussion.
discussion.
Have a discussion on a motion, is what she's suggesting. The chair has the discretion if the chair wants to open it for discussion before a motion and get, I mean.
Or until one is made?
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
Usually you have discussion after there's a motion, though.
All right.
So that you know what the discussion is about.
Correct. Yes. Correct.
Wonderful. All right. At this point, then, I will be open for a motion at this point on this case.
Move that we continue or continue a discussion.
So I think the board is wanting to discuss the case before a motion is made.
And the chair, I think, has discretion under Robert's rules to say that, why don't we discuss this and then see if a motion develops? But I think the record needs to be clear that that's what you're doing and having a discussion before a motion.
Should I move for discussion then?
No, I think.
Okay, so I'll just make it clear right now that
Yeah.
the board would like to discuss the case prior to a motion being made.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. Who would like to start? So just to start for our comments on this case then, no worries. So we have in front of us an application for several variance requests, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Onsager, if the first three requests are denied, there is an additional request for the shortening of a driveway.
That is correct.
Great. So what we're looking at right now are the first three requests of the variance,
And
which.
if the first three are approved, the driveway becomes moot.
Correct. So if the first three requests are approved, then there's no reason to vote on the fourth request for a driveway. Perfect. So looking to increase the number of principal structures to allow 2 single-family detached principal structures on this lot, a rear setback requirement from 20 feet to 8 feet, and a variance to the south side of the yard from 10 feet to 4 feet. Looking over the application, in terms of what the Board of Adjustment has to come to the conclusion is if there's an adequate hardship on the property that was not self-inflicted by the applicant themselves, it's specific to the property and it's held to the property itself, that we would be approving some sort of relief due to that hardship. And looking at what we've seen from staff's staff report and their presentation and the applicant and all of our citizen comments tonight, I'm trying to find what the hardship on the property itself would be. It's a square lot. It's relatively flat. The city did show an alternative to having this same structure on the property without the need for a request for a variance for the setbacks as well. Not the breezeway. There's another diagram in the staff report itself that would push the structure up against the house, which would allow for the second dwelling unit still and not require the request for a setback variance. They would be meeting their setbacks at that point with the same size structure just being attached to the structure, so not the breezeway.
Okay, thanks.
That's on, trying to find it now. That's
That
on page
diagram's-
8 of the staff report. Yeah.
Was that that second option, is that was that acceptable to the applicant?
That was prepared by the exhibit there, showing that arrangement was prepared by staff or by me. And so, like I said in the report, it doesn't take into consideration additional cost or potential context design structural issues that might arise by attaching those. But just from a straightforward lot layout perspective, it looked feasible, or looked, that was that. So
this is an option. So typically with hardships, it has to do with the shape of the lot, or if the lot is too steep and it'd become impractical to build on that type of slope, we would be able to allow a reduction in setbacks to either avoid the slope, or because of an odd-shaped lot, having the setbacks be too restrictive when otherwise on a normally shaped lot, it would be prudent to actually meet the setbacks in terms of development. So in looking at these applications, what the analysis that staff does is goes through the city code and whether or not a hardship has been established by the applicant, whether it was self-imposed, and if it's not an economic hardship as well.
Should we ask the applicant?
If you have questions for our applicant, I believe we can do so.
I do. Could
So,
you,
Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you. Could you respond to the alternate proposed on page 8?
Absolutely. So in the presentation, I highlighted that the alternate proposal, unfortunately for me, means that I'm not allowed to have a yard or open space. I basically commit all of the rear property to a driveway, and I'm personally just not a big fan of that. I think in order to maintain the character of the neighborhood, having some retention of yard space, like just somewhere outside other than concrete, that there can be grass, and the proposed plan eliminates that. I'll also add that I have a garden level basement. So as I mentioned in the presentation, I have to board up all of the windows on my garden level basement, which reduces all of the sun. And obviously there's engineering complexities and cost add when you attach a structure where the main floor starts 3 feet above the, where the garage would. So as a general statement, I wouldn't build the garage that way. I wouldn't build any structure that way. And if I had a choice between that and what I have now, I would choose what I have now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would the board like to continue discussion, or would somebody have a motion on this case?
As an alternate, I'm not allowed to make a motion, so.
Correct. I'm looking at you four right here. So.
What kind of motion do we need?
So right now, there's 2 different requests. There's one with the 3 variance requests. If that one's denied, there's the one for the driveway length. So there would have to be a second motion for that next one. But in terms of the actual motion you can make, there's before the staff report right here. I'm trying to remember what page on. You got it right here? All right.
All right.
Mr. Jenna.
I move to approve the BOA resolution 08-2019 with Exhibit A concerning the 3 variances. 3 variance of requirements for the maximum number of principal structures to allow 2 single-family detached principal structures on a single lot of record. A variance to the rear setback requirement 20 feet to 8 feet, and a variance to the south side setback requirement from 10 feet to 4 feet for the property at 5521 South Nevada Street.
All right, we have a motion on the floor by Mr. Jenna for approval of this case. Do we have a second?
I second.
And we have a second by Mr. Hummer. Would anyone like to discuss the motion that's currently on the floor right now? And I believe our alternates can still take part in the discussion of the motion, but will not be voting on the actual motion. They'll just be the 5 regular members. Okay.
Right.
So if anyone would have any discussion on the motion that's on the floor?
If I were voting, I would support the motion.
And I would too.
I would too.
we have any, Mr. Browning?
Yeah, I want to make a few comments here. I really appreciate the applicant and the information you provided. It really put a lot of context into the situation. I also want to send some kudos to staff for a very comprehensive, thorough analysis. And from a very humanistic standpoint, I'm very much in favor of what you're trying to do here and sympathize quite a bit with this approach. I'm also a little bit torn because I feel like from a legalistic point of view, looking at this in totality and what the board is and isn't allowed to do for a situation where this variance is being requested, I'm definitely torn on this. Actually not quite sure how I'm going to vote at this moment, but I really appreciate the gravity of this situation, and with the public comments and the neighbors and the effort that was done to solicit that input and try to make it more of a neighborhood type of thing, that goes a long way in my book for sure. There's a part of me that thinks that the right way to do this is to actually go through a process where this sort of situation would apply to everyone. And maybe the current, somewhere in the application I saw the word antiquated, and that might be the case. But to the extent that there's a kind of a broader way to handle this through the Planning Commission and City Council, I, for one, will be urging that, because I think this is something that is important for our city to look at on a broader scale, not just case by case. So I just wanted to say that I do understand all the elements and nuances of this, and it's a tough one for me.
Thank you, Mr. Browning. I would like to add to that and kind of echo your concerns about the proposal that's in front of us tonight versus what we have to, what kind of criteria that this board has to review these types of cases in terms of having accessory dwelling units have to be going to the Board of Adjustment time after time after time in order to be approved. I would agree with Mr. Browning that this should be something that could be resolved through a city code change for all of the citizens in this situation itself. So thank you very much for those comments.
And I have
Mr. Mitchell.
I have another comment. Zoning is a very complicated thing, and you have the, in this case, applicant, and he has property rights as an owner, and you have the surrounding community immediate to this property, adjacent to it, and then you have the larger community. And so it's a balance between property rights and zoning is a promise. Zoning is a promise that the city has made to, this is what can happen, this is what can't happen. So when you buy a property, whether it be 5521 or the one next door or the one down the block, you're told what can and cannot happen on each individual. But in this case, I don't see anybody hurt except the applicant if it's disapproved.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mitchell. Anyone else have anything to add on this case?
I would.
Mr. Jenna.
Yeah, really pretty much in support of your observation. I don't see anybody, any negative comments or anybody that's in the neighborhood and that has a vested interest in maintaining the character or seeing changes to the neighborhood that are protesting or at least against this change of the neighborhood. And based on at least the representation we have here, I think that the neighbors speak loudly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jenna. Yes, Ms.
Just a
Holland.
question. I'm brand new to this, so forgive me, but if we approve the variances tonight, that doesn't preclude going ahead with City Council and making the larger changes as referenced in the future, right?
That would not preclude City Council or community development to move forward with code changes. So regardless of which way the vote goes tonight, they would still be able to make those changes in the future for a citywide code change.
Great, thank you.
All right, seeing no other discussion on this motion, this is a motion for approval. I would like to call for a vote at this time. So using the switch underneath the table right here, we'll display our votes. So up, so up is yes, down is no. Okay, and we have, would you like to call it the vote?
The vote is 3 in favor with Board Member Browning and Chair Madrid voting no. The motion carries.
So your motion carries. Your variance has been approved, and there is no requirement to move forward with the alternate request of the driveway, correct? Great.
That is correct.
All right, so that'll be the only motion we have on this case tonight. So thank you for your presentation and for the citizens for coming out. That variance has been approved. The first 3 requests on that case have been approved. So moving on to comments and reports at this time, we'll start with our Community Development Director.
Good evening, Board. Thank you. Just a few updates. We'll be having a joint study session, City Council and Planning Commission, this coming Tuesday, the 25th, to discuss Envision Littleton, the progress we're making on the comp plan and the transportation master plan. There will be a table for the public, so if you're interested in coming, please come. It's going to be a slightly different format, that we will have groups and breaking up City Council and Planning Commission have discussion, going on more discussion for that. We are contemplating and will do code changes next year, and ADUs is definitely on that list. So to answer your question on that.
Good to hear.
Yep. Other than that, we definitely.
Can this be used as a case study?
Absolutely. I actually was going to ask the applicant if he spearhead that whole, what should that ADU thing look like? So I'll be calling you. Yes. So we absolutely can use this as a case study. This was challenging for staff to write and to consider and make a recommendation on. So, and I think just from a development review perspective, we have 73.
Roughly, I'd say minus some tax credit things, about 65 active cases.
65 active cases right now. We have a lot of resubmittal pending, so our Planning Commission has actually had some time to work on the comp plan with that, so that has been great because we haven't had a whole lot of cases going to Planning Commission, so that has been good. And other than that, if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
All right, thank you very much. Anything from staff?
No updates at this time.
No updates, all right, thank you very much. Anything from our board members tonight? No. And just from me, I would like to extend a welcome to our newest board members, 3 of you. Thank you for coming out tonight. It's great having you out here. And looking forward to having a full board here. That's great. So if there's nothing else tonight, I'll call for adjournment. Thank you very much.
Chair, do we want to call for a time to start our study session?
We can adjourn to a study session, yes.
Do we want to take a 10-minute break or 5-minute break in between?
Is it going to be in here or is it going to be over there? It's going to be over there? Yeah, I think a 10-minute break would be great.
Great.
Thank you very much. order. This is June 20th, 2019. Correct?
Want me to take over from there?
And yes, I would, if you wouldn't mind.
Right, I know we all met individually before the meeting, but I'm Paul Godek. I'm with Kissinger and Fellman. That firm is interim city attorneys for the city of Littleton right now. I don't know how much longer I will be with you. I understand that the interview process for the new city attorney has proceeded, that they have good candidates, so I don't know if there's going to be offers and negotiations or how much longer I'm going to be working with you. What typically happens, though, is the city attorney's office will handle, well, let me step back a bit. The city attorney's position is open and the assistant city attorney's position is open. So the city attorney who is hired, he or she will then get to hire assistant city attorney as part of the team. And when those folks are all up to speed, I think our firm phases out. We still do some work for the city, like if there's litigation or stuff like that, the city attorney and the assistant city attorney just don't have the bandwidth to do that on top of everything else that they've got to do. So, we've been doing work for the city for quite a decade now, I guess. So I suspect we'll still be around, but probably not representing the boards when that happens. So
on a quasi-judicial, which this is, the city attorney typically represents the staff, and then someone like you would come in and represent the board.
Well, if it's a difficult case, there could be situations, and we'll talk about this, that, I would represent the board. I will advise the board. If there was something we needed to go into executive session to discuss, we would do that to give you legal advice. Right. Typically, the staff pitches the thing themselves. Sometimes if the applicant has an attorney, the staff might want to hire an attorney, and sometimes there will be separate counsel for certain boards and certain commissions under certain circumstances. For example, the Board of Building Board of Appeals, that was it, had a very controversial case where they needed to tear down a building and do a nuisance abatement and something like that. So there was a city attorney at that time. So our firm was hired to represent staff.
Yeah, right.
So on that situation, and then after that, as things fell out, we were then made interim city attorneys because that was about the time that the city attorney was on leave and then resigned. So
Because Feldman started on the board, and then Kemp left, and so he couldn't move over and represent the staff. Yeah.
So it depends on what it is. So in certain circumstances, staff will have an attorney, the board will have an attorney, and the applicant will have an attorney. So depending on what it is, or in that case, the applicant or the property owner didn't have an attorney, but the staff did because of the complications that were going on. So that case actually will probably come to me because once everything's done and all the bills are assessed, I'm going to have to then move for foreclosure to get that property sold so that we can then pay the city back for all of its expenses. So I'll probably handle that litigation down the road. So anyway, we've entitled this Board of Adjustment 101, but as I've been telling the other boards, it's more like the first lecture on the first day of Board of Adjustment 101, okay? We're not going to dive that deep, okay? So the Board of Adjustment's powers and duties are set by the Littleton Municipal Code in 23101. So you handle appeals of interpretation related to zoning regulations. You handle requests for zoning variances like we saw tonight, and appeals and requests for variances to the sign code. That's typically what you have. There's other things that could come before the board, but I don't want to dive too deep because if those things happen, staff as it did tonight will tell you what provision that's under, and that's part of the staff presentation. But these are the typical things that come before the board. So I think that this discussion tonight was really kind of perfect for the training that comes on. So as your chair was pointing out, usually you have to have special circumstances in order to get a variance, right? So had this been more controversial, I probably would have had you spend some time making some findings on that property then, would that have been to the north?
The south.
To the big property that we did. Some findings that has now changed this, has created circumstances on this property that were different. And for those reasons, we might want to do that. But otherwise, we went through all those categories. Variance would be in harmony with the purposes of the city code, not injurious to the neighbor, but variance is the minimum one necessary. Well, your point was well taken, you know. I mean, anybody else buys this property, there's going to be 4 units there. He's asking for 2, you know. If he goes from 1 to 2, is that the minimum necessary? Well, the minimum necessary would have been maybe doing nothing.
1, yeah.
You know, and having the 1. So, you know, but we might have had done some more work to make some findings had this been a little more difficult of a case, okay? You could have put more conditions on this and said, all right, we're going to grant this variance, but we're going to require you to do X or Y or Z. I think that between staff and the applicant, there was plenty of consideration of all that, so there really wasn't a lot of room. But if there was stuff that came up in public comment or things like that, you might have been able to say, all right, we'll put some more criteria on that.
You could have said, the height can't exceed, or that kind of.
Something like that, if it's consistent with the zoning, right. So it could have been something.
If we put conditions on to an approval that the applicant is not wanting, would they have to withdraw the case at that point? Or
Withdraw the application if that's the.
prior to the vote, right?
Or after the vote, they could just consider not going forward.
Okay.
You know, I mean, you've given him the relief or part of the relief, but the conditions you've placed on it, you know, and he says, I don't want to mess with that, I'll sell the property and let somebody build a fourplex on it.
In other words, there'd be a motion and a second, and then someone might come along and say, okay, but we're going to say it can only be so much, and then that motion might pass, and that becomes part of the main motion, but then the property owner says, I don't want to do it, and he just.
Yeah, if that came up during discussion, we'd have to either amend the motion or.
Yeah, there would be a second motion. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay. So, as came up tonight, the city council sets the zoning. It sets it through the zoning, through ordinances. So, you know, that's the role of the council. And then we fill in those gaps here. You know, we interpret that zoning, and we you know, is there variances? Is there reasons under the code that we can give a variance? And so, and council has control by appointing members of the Board of Adjustment. So that's the role of council. Role of staff, as we saw tonight, you know, the community development staff does a lot of work before it gets to you. You know, they go through a lot of these applications. They go through they have a lot of conversations with the applicants. They look at, you know, what applies, what things, you know, are going to need to be brought before you, and, you know, sort through all of the parts of the code that are applicable and try to, you know, not make you go on that you know, seek and destroy mission, okay? Staff usually through Colleen does the scheduling and the noticing. Staff through the community development people prepare the reports. Staff through Colleen usually gives meeting minutes. If there's some special requirements or something like that, contacting Colleen and saying, you know, I need something because, you know, I've got a scheduling problem, or, you know, as we were seeing tonight, because the mayor has a bum knee, she has a trash can that she puts her foot up on. Right? So that's the sort of thing that you know, Colleen will provide that kind of assistance for.
I put it back.
I'll put a trash can with a pillow under it for any of it. You betcha.
So under the grand scheme of things, the Home Rule Charter, Littleton is a home rule municipality, and under Colorado Constitution, home rule municipalities can adopt their charter, which essentially is our Constitution. It sets the standards for governance within the city. Okay? And so that's sort of the big picture stuff. Then within that, council passes ordinances, some of which are zoning ordinances and things like that, and that's effectively our statutes that we operate under. So as a home rule municipality, our statutes do not have to be the same as state statutes unless the state has adopted a statute that sort of preempts the field, and the city's statute or the city's ordinance is in conflict with it. So as an example of that. Good. We're on the same wavelength here. So in the most recent legislature, General Assembly passed some changes to how we regulate oil and gas within municipalities. It used to be the way that was done, it preempted the field and said the Oil and Gas Commission got to set all of the rules, and the rules were set based on what's good for development of the natural resource. Okay? And because they had preempted the field, cities, including home rule cities, couldn't regulate that. So if somebody said, I want to develop that, oil and gas and drill a well in my backyard, and the oil and gas commission said go for it, the city couldn't stop it. Okay? So in the most recent legislation, what they did was said, all right, we're going to change that standard and say, A, it's not just to develop the resource, but also we got to consider what's good for public health, what's good for the economy, and things like that. Put some other criteria. And it said cities can still regulate that. And so it gave the power back to the cities to regulate that through zoning. So that expressly took the preemption away in that situation. So sometimes it becomes my problem as the city attorney to fight, has that preempted? Is this a mixed? Is this consistent with what the state statute is and not, in conflict? And how can we harmonize them and things like that? So typically, though, a home rule municipality, as long as it is not in conflict with state statutes, will set the rules within the city limits. Now, a statutory municipality or a statutory town has to comply with state statutes. So the city has adopted procedural rules that apply to all boards and all commissions, including city council. So I think that's in your packet that Colleen gave you, so I'm not going to try to repeat that, but it sort of goes through that. In those procedural rules, we do not expressly adopt Robert Rules of Order. They use a more relaxed standard of Robert's Rules of Order, so I kind of call them Bob's guidelines. Okay? And this came up tonight. So usually under Robert's Rules, the chair has a lot of discretion. And we were talking during the break that the other night at the Historic Preservation Board meeting, one of the issues was before there were several applications to get access to some funds to do historic preservation work in the community. And there was, I think, 3 applications, and there was, I think, $60,000 or $40,000 or something was the total. And the requests were more than that. So there was like $70,000 worth of requests for $50,000 worth of money. And the chair said, I don't want to wait for a motion. Let's talk about our priorities and how are we going to do it. What things do we think are more important for historic preservation? And so the chair entertained discussion first that then led to a motion. As people were talking about that, people started saying, well, we think this is more important, or this person has gotten money for something in the past. And so as that process went on, it sort of built into a motion. So I don't think it's inappropriate for the chair to do that, but like what happened tonight, I think we need to make it clear what's going on. Typically, you don't have discussion until there's a pending motions, so we know what we're talking about.
So the previous 2 hearings that we've had, that's what we've done. We've had the discussion first, and then we've had a motion and a vote.
Yeah.
So was I just more clear on those other hearings, or do I need to say something specific?
Well, I think kind of what we ended up doing tonight, I say I'm going to entertain a discussion from the board without a motion.
Okay.
And
Just make it clear that there's no motion that we're discussing.
Yeah, and the chair's prerogative, I can do that, and I want to see if that, if that helps us get to a motion more clearly. Oftentimes, something's very clear that you're either going to vote up or down just because it's either right in line or off sheet. So
Yeah, I think tonight was interesting because you were looking for a motion and there wasn't one.
Yeah.
And so, because typically that's the best way to do it is you ask for a motion. But I thought then it turned out just right because no one was making a motion.
Yeah.
So it made sense to have some more discussion so we could somebody got comfortable to make a motion.
Sure. You needed to think out loud a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
And you need to hear each other because that's what boards do, right? You've got to work as a group and make a decision as a group. So hearing from each other and seeing where things go. So I think that typically, probably 90%, 95% of the time, you're going to wait and get a motion and a second and discussion on that. If you get a motion but no second,
Motion dies. Yeah.
motion dies, you wait for another motion. Sometimes what happens, go ahead.
There's all these discussions that they have to be open, unveiled, like we have.
Yeah, you need to make a record we'll talk a little bit more about this. I mean, what we're doing now is we're bringing the evidence into the hearing, and we're making a record to support the decision. That's what that is. So it's unlike a jury that deliberates in secret, you need to deliberate in public. Now, there would be a reason that we could go into executive session if you needed legal advice from the city attorney or something like that, and then we would recess. We would say we're going into executive session because the board wants to obtain legal advice, and then we would record the executive session because that's required by the open meetings law. But public wouldn't know that.
We can't discuss the...
You couldn't discuss the substance and make a decision. Right. You would only discuss for purposes of legal advice or things like that.
If there were...
Procedure.
Yeah.
If one of the members, one of the 5 permanent members or active members, happened to not be here and then became capable of making motions and so on, secondly, what I might very well do, if a motion was made, I might second it even though I disagreed with the motion, just so there could be discussion.
Right. Sure.
So
you could, yeah.
You have to have a starting point.
Yeah, you can second a motion and still vote it down.
Absolutely. So we'll get to that. So stages of the meeting. Generally, there's 2 stages of an evidentiary hearing, which is what we did tonight, quasi-judicial. You know, there's the fact presentations, and then there's the deliberation and the fact-finding, the decision-making. Okay? So staff usually goes first, and they're bringing in evidence. They're bringing in that perspective, then the applicant, and then members of the public, so we got all those perspectives. I thought that tonight was a very good example because, you know, there was a lot of people from the neighborhood who got to talk, okay? In this, you know, when you're hearing the evidence, you should avoid taking a position. Even, you know, when you get the packet and you look through that, you don't have everything you're going to get. You know, this is sort of the starting point. You're going to, by being prepared, actually, you will be better equipped to ask questions, but you haven't made a decision because you make a decision as a group. You can't make a decision in your own head. You got to listen to your other members of your board, okay? So you're in here to gather as much information, stuff that you think is important for you to make a decision. And it's the same thing you would do in any other important decision in your life. You know, if you're going to buy a car, you go and test drive. You know, you go and look at what other models. You talk to your friends. It's the same sort of thing you do in making any other decision. So then the deliberation and then the decision-making stage is where you get to the point where you have a motion, discussion, motion second, discussion, and a vote. So because you're acting kind of as a jury or as a judge, it's a quasi-judicial process. And by quasi-judicial, it's applying bigger concepts to one property, to one applicant, right? So you have to have the evidence to support that, and so that's why you're kind of in a jury setting. So that's typically what happens when you get to variances. Okay, so the parties are the city, and so, you know, it's like Jennifer Henninger said tonight, this was a tough one for staff because they're the keeper of the code, right? And they need to support that, and they need to analyze that, and they need to bring you the information as what's right for supporting what council has passed as the law of the city. Now, the applicant wants some variation from that. So they're going to have a different perspective, and it's sort of quasi-adversarial, you know, quasi-judicial. And, you know, when I'm in trial, you know, this adversarial system is supposed to, you know, beat the truth out of the facts, right? And so by putting the facts in the adversarial roles, you know, the jury or the judge can make a decision. Yes.
On more than one occasion, we had cases brought to us by staff, and when it was all over, staff said, "Thank you for not agreeing with me." But it was their job to what he said. But they were glad they lost. The staff was glad they lost, kind of thing.
They're the keeper of the code.
They have a set criteria in the code that they have to go by, and sometimes and we've had that happen on the board just recently, where they're recommending approval of a variance from that code still, and it's because they met the criteria that's also in the code to vary from certain development regulations.
But the staff will take a case where they hope they lose, but that's what they need to present
They need to present that evidence, they need to create that record. Yeah. So pre-meeting considerations on a quasi-judicial things. So you're going to get your packet, and you're going to get your notice of your meeting. So once you've got that, you really shouldn't engage in ex parte communications with staff, the applicants, interested parties, neighbors, things like that. Because you're going to try, what we have to make a decision on is the record that is developed at the hearing. So if you're out doing stuff on your own and doing your own investigation, that's something outside the hearing. Now, if you make individual site visits or do investigation, sometimes what we do is we make that part of the record. So one of the other committees, I think it was Historic Preservation, where he does this wonderful thing at the beginning of when considering it. Because some of this stuff, I mean, you drive by this stuff every day. You live in the neighborhood. You drive by, go on to work or whatever. So he always asks, has anybody visited the site? And did you talk to anybody? If so, what did they say? Now, all of a sudden, we brought in to the evidence of the record what was outside, right? So now we know, usually they say, I drove by the property, or I live down the block from it, and I drive by it all the time. And so I've seen it, I've seen the request, I didn't talk to anybody. Sometimes you might get an email, sometimes you might run into somebody in the grocery store, something like that. But now you bring that in. I ran into one of the neighbors, they said this was coming before the board, and they started advocating to me, and I said, really, because I'm on the member of board, in honor of the process and to make sure the process is fair to everyone, I encourage you to come to the meeting and tell me what you think, so that it's part of all of us hearing that, and then you just politely tell them I'm really not appropriate for me to hear that, separate from the rest of the board, and encourage them to come. So you got to be fair and impartial as decision makers as you're going through the process, and then make these disclosures. We had a situation a few weeks back where council members were getting a lot of emails on a decision that was coming before council. And they were responding to them, mostly saying, thank you for your interest, this is coming up before board, or this is coming before council, this is an important issue, or stuff like that. But part of what we were thinking about is, what do we do now that all of these emails have been part of the record? So we were, actually contemplating, we were going to print out all the emails, make it part of the council packet so that all council members had the same information. And about that time, the applicant withdrew the request. So that problem went away. My work here was done. So, but what we want to do is make the same record for all members so that everybody has the opportunity to consider the same information. So as we saw tonight, this is the order of the proceedings. I don't think there's much to go over that because that's just what we just saw. But the staff presentation generally is the overview of the facts and issues. And a lot of that's usually in the report. But sometimes, like tonight, this zoning has probably been changed 5 times since that property was built, right? And so there's a lot of stuff that, the history, the background, things like that could come in. Summary of the application request. They will bring to you, all right, this is the applicable provision, this is the applicable zoning, and they had it all in their report and had all the citations and all of that stuff. They usually make a recommendation, and you are encouraged to then extract from them what you need to help you make that decision. And I think we were very effective at that. All right, staff, tell me something more about this, or would this be okay? I think the question, if this were being torn down and starting over, how many units would be required? 4 or 5, right? So that's an important thing to ask as part of that process. Usually the applicant's presentation doesn't just repeat the same stuff with the staff is given. It will be more of a supplement. I'm going to bring in other stuff. I'm going to tell you things that they didn't tell you. Now, they're going to be advocating for a position. So as we saw tonight, I'm going to bring in broader context. I've talked to the neighbors that are here to talk. But you're encouraged, again, to extract as much information as you can from the applicant that will help. Then you open the public meeting. And we saw this the other night. I think it was the Historic Preservation Board. when the public came in and said some stuff, it was like you could see the light bulbs going on over the members of the board's head. It was like nobody had thought of that. Staff hadn't thought of that. Applicant had a thought about it. And so some of the stuff that the staff was raising, or the public was raising, was useful to say, well, should we place some other conditions on this? Should there be something else that would be useful as far as going forward then? Now, this could go on forever. And as we saw, it was the school board in Douglas County the other night. They had 60-some people sign up for 3 minutes apiece. Okay, that can take a while. So we need to put some limitations on that, but typically, as long as they're on topic, go ahead.
Just a question. This applicant tonight seemed very, very well-educated, and is that typical?
No.
Okay, I mean, that seemed very concise.
It's a board, this is a board where normally homeowners who are trying to fix a deck or build a fence or something, they'll come in. They usually don't hire a consultant for these types of things.
That seemed very robust.
Yeah, for like a rezoning or something like that, they may hire a consultant to kind of take them through the process and kind of represent them throughout. But for this board, it's generally a lot of homeowners trying to do some stuff.
So like the licensure for somebody's coming in for a liquor license, typically they bring in an attorney and make sure that they meet all the stuff that's required under the statute. So that's usually a much higher level presentation. But, often in these presentations, you're going to have, it's like pulling teeth. You got to ask a lot of questions because they're not used to public speaking. They're not used to organizing their thoughts like this guy was tonight. And so you really have to extract the information that you need to make that decision. Typically, we don't ask questions of members of the public unless it's sort of a clarifying question. You said something, I'm not sure what you mean by that, and then get some clarifying questions. But they get their time to say what they think about that. And it happens a lot like we saw tonight. And this is where we kind of got goofed up in the process. So then after the presentation of the public, usually the staff and the applicant have a chance to rebut or respond to whatever the public said. So if something new comes up, they're like, well, that's a good idea, and they might consider that a friendly amendment to their application. And then if you're putting conditions on, and they've already agreed to it, then everything is hunky-dory, So stuff like that can happen, but usually, stuff comes up when the public speaks, and then you may have questions for the staff, or at least give them an opportunity to rebut or respond to that, and then you get that final opportunity to glean whatever information you might find useful. So then, as we saw, close the public hearing, and typically, you entertain a motion and get a second, then you know what you're discussing, okay? Encourage discussion. Now, this is where you're going to make your record about what you found persuasive. So I think that, even when you started the discussion, these are the criteria, these are the landmarks that we have to meet, Is this a self-inflicted wound? Was this, created by the property owner? And if that's a criteria, and you were persuaded that they had met that standard to do that. But that's where you start, talking about what are the criteria that apply, what are the issues before you, what are the facts, and you start making your record as to what you find persuasive, and then as everybody adds to that discussion, we build a complete record as to what you did.
And I think Mike did a good job of that.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think that that's part of what, and then that's all recorded, that's part of the record, and if there's some challenge to what you did, then it's an appeal on the record, and then I have to go to the district judge and say, the record supports their finding. And if, on an appeal, you make the decision by public vote, and in some cases, and we'll talk about this, council may consider what you've done or what you've recommended down the road. But if all of that is now in the record and I have to take it to a judge, the judge, the standards is the judge can't substitute his judgment for yours. The judge has to take your judgment as long as there's support for it in the record. So even if the judge would have done something different, if the board's created a record and there's evidence to support it, the judge has to Judge is mostly looking at the process. Did you do everything correctly? Did you have evidence in the record to support this decision? And if that's the case, then the judge should affirm it, okay? So it's a clearly erroneous standard, or, and then the court, if the court does something arbitrary, capricious, and unreasonable, then I would take it on appeal to the Colorado Court of Appeals. So generally, you don't have much of a let's go back. Anybody questions on quasi-judicial stuff?
So someone could appeal our decision to district court. Is that correct?
I think that's where they go, yeah. Okay. So, I would be defending.
A couple of earlier slides said that the city council has a review of this also.
They don't? In some situations, and that's what we're about to get to. Okay,
so we're a board that actually makes decisions, and the decision sticks, whereas like planning commission just makes a recommendation to the board or the city council.
So you have a legislative role, and I think this came up tonight, right? So this zoning says it has to be attached for the properties in this zone district to have more than one housing unit on the land, on the lot. Well, this may be something that, and Jennifer was saying, this may be the poster boy for, maybe we need to tweak that zone district rule a little bit. So if there is stuff like that comes before the Board of Adjustment, you're saying, this code makes no sense, and we're, forced to interpret this. We think it would make more sense if it said this. And you want to make a recommendation to council to change the zoning rules or something like that. That would be a legislative sort of role. Now, in a legislative role, you don't take public comment. You might have discussion with staff because they brought something for you to consider and make a recommendation. Or, like we saw tonight, we had this, well, staff, has there been any other situations where you've had similar kinds of problems with, this sort of thing?
And don't you think it might be appropriate for this board to do that on this particular issue?
So we're not a legislative board.
We can be.
No, I think you could have a study session and say, we think because of our interpretation of the statute, we make a recommendation then to
staff.
Or to staff or to council that they should amend the zoning because our job is to interpret it, and when we're interpreting that, it's goofy.
Right, but that recommendation to council would come from you through staff.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, then staff would take it to council and say, this was considered.
Well, so staff is the one who would make a regulation amendment if they, and like what he's saying, we can call for a study session, kind of talk about that issue with them. But ultimately, they would be taking that change to the code to city council themselves.
Because that's the way the rules are set.
Right.
Yeah.
You would do it by resolution. There'd be a BOA resolution recommending changes that staff would then take to council, and council would.
And I've seen it where staff came to the board and asked us to support him going to council.
And they're in the process of doing some of this, like, I think this, they call them PDAs. They've kind of gotten rid of that. PDOs, yeah. Last year, council kind of got rid of that. So a lot of these zonings that are out there, kind of goofy PDOs, they're not doing those anymore because council took that out of the zoning code. So there's some of that stuff that's ongoing. In fact, that's one of the things I'm charged with looking at is these things start coming before council. I work with staff to make sure it's drafted and it has the language in there that staff wants to recommend. So those things are coming. So I think we could have a legislative role. I think it's limited and it's not quasi-judicial. So once you've voted to recommend by resolution that this is going, you're asking staff to carry this to council. You don't take public comment. You don't do any of that usual stuff. So a legislative role, because it's broader, it's not quasi-judicial. You're not directing it to one property. You're directing it to all properties in the city and saying anything in that zone district should have these regulations, or this zoning requirement. So it's a different, now, you really don't have a regulatory role. Like the Historic Preservation Board has, it's to encourage programs on the history of Littleton and do things like that. So it's not necessarily, legislative or quasi-judicial that they're dealing with, but they have a mandate under that. So they have rules and programs and things that they put together for that. I just can't think of a regulatory rule that you have that's sort of one step below that. So if something comes up, I'm happy to consider it, but I can't think of one that you have right now. Because you are a public board and you have to meet publicly, you're subject to the Sunshine Law, the Open Meetings Law for the state of Colorado. That's the citation. So statute says a meeting is any kind of gathering convened to discuss public business in person, by telephone, electronically, or by any other means of communication. I don't know how you say that any more broadly.
Yeah, in this one.
Yeah. So when does the open meetings law apply? Well, it has to have a meeting, right? And a meeting concerns when there is a discussion of something, a rule, regulation, ordinance, something that comes before you, right? Something within your purview. So a quorum or 3 or more members of a local body, whichever is fewer. Okay, so what do you have? 5 members? So 4 members.
4 is a quorum.
Yeah, 4 is, so if you have a quorum, but so 3 would be fewer. So if 3 of you run into each other in the grocery store and start talking about public business, you're having a meeting under the open meetings law, and you need to stop yourself, right? Because it hasn't been noticed, it's not being recorded, it's not public, all of those things that have to happen for it to be a public meeting, okay? What is not a meeting? A social gathering. So you had the boards and commissions dinner what's that, last week? Yeah, so that's not. Now, if 3 of you went over in the corner and started discussing this case because you'd already gotten your packet, that might have been a meeting. But, just social gatherings, okay? Discussion of stuff that's a matter of concern, okay? You guys are talks, it's coming before council, they're going to change the zoning to this. All right, that's not before you. It's not within your purview. It's before council. So it's a matter of public concern. You can discuss it amongst yourself with 3 or more because it's not coming before you. You could have a discussion, is Joe Flacco going to save the Broncos? It's a matter of public importance, okay? But it's not something that's within your scope, within your purview. So you can talk about that. That is not a meeting, okay? But so you really need to ask yourself, is this an applicant sought relief, or is this something that could become for us where an applicant would seek relief? That's probably something you shouldn't discuss, except at a public meeting. Now, for an open meeting, the requirements that there be full and timely notice, and typically it's 24 or more hours. And this is always where I cue Colleen to tell me every place we post the meetings.
So all of our meetings are posted on our website in 2 locations under our city calendars and events. And then we have a meetings and video link for all of our quasi boards. And so it's posted in both those places. And then we post in the entry lobby of this building, at the municipal courthouse, and at the library.
Okay.
So you're posting on site?
On the property site?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No, that would only come into if you're doing a public hearing for rezoning or something like that. And there's a different burden that needs to be met. There's like a 30-day. We would run into that.
There was a sign on this property.
Right, but that may have been for another issue.
No, it was.
But see, that's not something that would come from our office or from the clerk's office as far as.
It wasn't required.
I did a site thing today, and it said, come to the hearing tonight if you want.
Oh, so he posted something.
He probably posted something because he knew everyone
It was a city sign.
But it's not a requirement for a
Yes.
variance.
Oh, okay, all right.
It's not required.
It's not a requirement.
Okay, thank you. We're before the licensure board for a liquor license or a medical marijuana
There's a
dispensary?
10-day requirement.
There would have to be a posting on the property.
And then that also gets noticed in the paper.
Right.
There's another level, depending on the kind of haircut it is.
But by noticing the meeting in the agenda, people then can decide whether they come or not. Okay? So if you violate the open meetings requirements, a court may declare void anything that you happened at the meeting. Not only that, but somebody who challenged you to what you did at the meeting may be awarded their attorney's fees if they prevail. Now, I was at the Colorado Municipal League Conference today. One of the things that was talked about there, fascinating, was the mysteries of municipal insurance. Like watching concrete harden, right?
A lot of coffee for that one, right?
But you're covered under the city's coverage, because as long as you're acting within the scope and course of your official authority as a member of the board. So the city would pay. It's not going to come out of your pocket. But if it's goofed up, then the city may have to pay the attorney's fees to the people that tell the judge you screwed it up. Okay? So part of what my job as city attorney is to do is to preserve the process and to preserve the record. So if I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just making sure it gets in the record so that nobody challenges you. So that whatever you're doing, or we follow the right process by the rules so that everybody says this was all done by the book. Okay? The interesting thing about all of this is that because those communications in electronic form can constitute a meeting, so if somebody sends out an email to the group and says, we're coming, make sure to bring your Robert's Rules of Order to the study session, and then you start discussing in response emails something that's coming before the board, you may have just had a meeting. Staff is really good about sending out your notices on a blind copy so you can't respond all, right? So that you can't then get a meeting started before the meeting. So we try to take those kind of precautions so that you don't inadvertently violate the open meetings law. So don't reply all. Now, if it's something having to do with the schedule, or is it 6 o'clock or is it 6:30 or something like that? Okay, it's not substantive. It's not a problem. But if it's substantive and you reply all, you may have inadvertently started a meeting, and we may need to do something to fix that. So if you're all on Facebook, pals, I don't know. But if you're on Facebook and you start discussing public business on Facebook, we had 2 sessions on that today at the Colorado Municipal League because council members foul this up all the time. Okay? They got Facebook groups and they're putting out, you've created a public forum and you've allowed people to comment, and then what can you do? Can you block people? Can you, how do you, can you turn that off? Once you've turned it on, are you stuck with it? And there's been a really big case that's been to the district court in District of Columbia that says Trump's Twitter feed is a public forum because he takes public comment back. And if he wants to take public comment, he can't block people that are adverse to his opinions. And that's working its way through the courts, but the district court in District of Columbia says you've created a public forum with your Twitter feed by doing that. So it's better that we don't do that and don't discuss anything on those sort of social media or any of you Twitter maniacs. So the board's procedural rule or the city's procedural rule don't permit the boards to meet electronically. Okay? Some boards do that, or they have it in their charter that says you can do that. So you shouldn't do that. And if we're going to have a meeting, sometimes if we need a quorum, and we need to have somebody call in because they're in the hospital or something, we may have to deal with that. Okay, but that will be me figuring out how do we preserve the process and make sure that we don't do anything that goofs that up. Under the corporate governance statutes, as long as everybody on a corporate board, a shareholder meeting, as long as everybody can hear everybody else, you can have a shareholder meeting electronically. Call it. Now, I don't think you can have a board of directors meetings electronically. So The other thing that happens that protects you by having a public meeting is we keep the minutes, right, which is the recording. So by doing that, then, we know what you've done, everything's here. And if somebody needs to come back in 5 years and say, now, what did they do, or what did they discuss, or what happened, then we've all got that record, which doesn't happen if we don't have an official meeting. So that's kind of the day one lecture on Board of Adjustment 101. Because I'm an interim city attorney and I charge the city hourly in order for them to control the budget, if you have questions for me, run them through Colleen, right? Because if it's something staff can answer or Colleen can answer, and the city doesn't get a bill from me, that's great. That's great. So we're trying to manage the budget carefully. But otherwise, if it's something that you feel like you need legal advice. Now, I advise the board as a group, but I will take calls from members, and then if it's something, I'll say, well, that's something the board has to decide as a group, but here are your options. I will answer your questions. But I will remind you that the board works as an entity, not as a collection of individuals. Okay? Any questions for me?
No, thank you. Well done.
Yes.
You want to mention Cora real quick? Open Records Act?
Yeah, so Colorado Open Records Act, it's a nightmare. But, because everything you do is public, and the Colorado Open Records Act requires certain things records to be maintained. If somebody requests, the city has to produce the packet, and somebody asks for it, or the recording within 3 days. If they need more time, they need to say so, and then the Cora allows them to make reasonable charges for staff time and for replication of documents and stuff, but we need to keep everything subject to open meetings is also subject to an open records request. Now, you're not subject to a criminal justice records request because you don't have criminal justice functions, but yeah, so everything we do, if somebody asks for it, they're going to get the same packet. So all of that will be part of what we preserve.
And this is one reason why we really request that any board business be conducted using your city-issued emails, so that we don't have to try and go after private emails or things like that.
So that's why you all get your little screen that you get to do stuff with, because that preserves that for public records requests. Right? Ready, set, go. Any other business to discuss? Do we want to introduce each other, or it's getting pretty late?
Yeah, if we can go around real fast and just introduce everyone.
So,
I know Mr. Mitchell just left, so.
He's apparently traveling.
Yeah, he said before we started this that he'd have to go at a certain time, so.
hey, can I offer just a little information on Dave then?
Yes.
So, Dave Mitchell has served on our Building Board of Appeals for 9 years. The last couple as its chair, so we have a wealth of experience. Yes. And so, yeah, that's why he's a wealth of knowledge. So he was termed out on his last board because you can serve 3 terms. But he still wanted to volunteer for the community in some way, so that's why he's here.
You want to start?
Colleen Norton, Deputy City Clerk, and I'll be your liaison for this board. In your packets, you have contact for staff, for Jennifer, for Mike Sutherland, and also for Denise Cernia, who is the Executive Assistant for Community Development. Anything that you need to communicate with staff, you should probably include all of us in the email. If you're not going to be able to attend a meeting, that email should come to all of us in that contact as well as your chair, because your chair is going to need to know if he's going to have a quorum or not. And we would need to know that sooner rather than later. If we've already noticed a meeting and we have less than 24 hours, and we know we're not going to have a quorum, we're still going to call the meeting to order and then continue everything for lack of a quorum. But if we know more than 24 hours in advance, we have time to cancel everything, nobody has to show up. Just makes it a little cleaner, and then we just continue everything administratively, okay? And emergencies are gonna happen, certainly, but if you know ahead of time you're gonna be out of town, whether for business, on vacation, you know, your kid has a little league game, you know, Nordstrom's having their half-yearly sale and I need shoes. You know, important stuff, right? Just kind of let us know ahead of time. And you should always include your chair as well.
We'll just go around the table.
I'm William Hummer. Obviously, it's my first board meeting here, so I'm looking forward to it. I live just up in Old Littleton, so it's real close for me, so I should be here for most meetings. I will be out of town for one I already noticed. I'll let you know which one that is, but other than that, I look forward to working with everybody.
What do you do that makes you want to be on the board?
What's that?
What do you do that made you want to be on the board?
I have a pretty extensive background in real estate, and I actually work for Comcast. I was pretty familiar with that. I do a lot of MDU development and easement and licensing work.
Okay.
So I didn't really know that was what the property was talking about until I got to the meeting tonight. But honestly, I did our rights to get our network in that building. So, but no, I just kind of wanted to give back. I just kind of moved to the Littleton area about 6 months to a year ago. I planned on being a long-term resident, so I really wanted to get to know the city better, get to know some more residents, and just kind of get back to the community. Since I've been moving around from city to city for many years, I finally settled. So it's going to be nice to actually meet people and give back to the community.
Jim Johnson, been on the board now a little over a year, full-time. Been in Littleton for 11 years, maybe 12 years. And, what prompted me to was I had to appear before him one time. So I figured, well, okay, maybe it'll lend a thought or two to this thing. So I figured that's the path I take, see what happens. That's what got me interested in it. I can relate to what this guy was doing tonight.
Yeah. My name is Mike Madrid. Been on the board. This is my second year on the board. Last year as an alternate member. Let's see. Yeah, I'm on the board. I work in Jefferson County as a senior planner in their planning and zoning department, and so I'm where staff is out here. That's where I am, up at the Taj in Golden. So we have a bit more of a heavy caseload out there. Our last hearing yesterday had 8 cases on it, and the one before that had 5, and our one coming up will have 4. And so I'm our staff liaison for the Board of Adjustment out there. So we see a lot of the different cases out there. So I have a bit of a background in it, I guess. So.
Don Jenna, I've been a resident of Littleton for about 25 years. My association with Littleton goes back to when my wife and I decided to elope. We worked a deal with the judge in the Littleton City Hall. And so it turns out that we go back, we just had our 50th anniversary. So my relationship with Littleton goes back far distance. It turns out that I also have a civil engineering background, and I'm also, by way of community, I'm also the HOA president of the Hamlet. And so a lot of what I see that we have to deal with and other HOAs have to deal with, you know, on a different scale, you know, comes to this forum. So, you know, when I sit there, I still have my president's hat on and look at it from where I would be looking at it as a president of an HOA. And so I think I like to try to bring that perspective. And I think it's served us well.
My name is Kathy Holland, and I think I have you all beat. I've lived in Littleton for almost 35 years now, raised both my kids here. I currently work as a minister of federal grants for nonprofits. And I kind of like you, I live in Ridgewood Village, and it's an older neighborhood that's slowly turning over, and there was no sheds, now we can have sheds, and so, and I love Littleton, I want to see the nature and everything preserved, but to see growth and keep up with the times, and I think this is a great board to be a part of.
Great, yeah, Tom Browning, and I've been on the BOA for 3 meetings now, so I'm a new member. Raised in Littleton, went to Whitman, Euclid, and Heritage High School. And then after college, I moved away to a few other places and came back because I loved it here. But by way of background, I'm a civil engineer. I've been doing that for my whole career. Also a licensed real estate agent. I don't really practice that. I usually do that to support my own habits, but kind of keep it active just in case I do something with it. But yeah, it's great to serve and to give back to the community and be part of this and to try to help, shape our future and do the right thing.
My degree is in civil engineering, and I went to law school after that. Just kidding.
Boy, you made a bad error.
I always say what it does is it gives me a kind of a good BS meter, It doesn't make any sense, and then I go hire an engineer that could really do it. So, anyway, great, you guys sounds like a very knowledgeable group.
A lot of engineers.
Just another question that, I know it's Title 10, do we need to be really well versed on that?
That's why staff is there to take any questions. If you have, so if you have a question on something during the case about the zoning, you may have heard me ask them a couple questions. How tall can the structure be? How big can it be? Where can it be? Those are the kind of questions that staff can answer for us.
So we shouldn't be reviewing that kind of stuff before and or because it's code?
You can.
We can be familiar because
You
it's code.
can, yeah. No, I'm not trying to discourage it. I'm just saying if you aren't well versed in the code, I don't think that's necessarily a detriment since we do have staff there to help us out.
Our code is available on our website.
Yeah, so go to the
It's very
website,
easy
you go to the
navigate.
bottom.
Yeah,
And click on
really
city
easy to
code.
navigate,
Just come right up, and you can go
you
forward.
know. And I'm
That's what I do.
odd in that way when I found out I was
Make sure
getting
that's in
liquor
compliance.
licensing. I spent a weekend reading the entire Colorado State Liquor Code. So,
You're saying I don't need to do
I wouldn't, but I mean, it's available online, so if you want to just make sure that the information that's being provided is clear to you.
Yeah.
Great.
So I did read through the R5 code before coming here, but I don't know everything about it. I wouldn't claim to, so, yeah.
One thing I'd make a recommendation. I know that you were very explicit about a site visit, being able to identify that and provide that to the board at the meeting. I'd recommend that if you do have the time and you're looking at a package or something like that, as a civil engineer, you ought to walk the site. Okay, get out there, take a look at it, so because you can see a lot of those pictures from up top, or you can get information from neighbors and stuff like that, but you really don't have the touch and feel of what the real issue is. And so it's a lot easier to relate and to be able to understand the context of what's going on, rather than just necessarily the content that the staff is providing. So.
I try to do it just with a drive-by, otherwise you'll have to be involved with a conversation with the people doing it.
Yeah.
One of them, the lady was standing right out in front talking to the neighbor. And One night, there's no way you could really see it. You can drive by from half a block away, but you can't drive it down the front. Poor guy's got construction blocking his front road.
Right.
So I just did a westbound and headed north.
It's good, yeah.
That's all you can do, just to see.
Well, just to kind of make sure you don't end up in a conversation that you shouldn't be having.
So we can drive by, we just can't really discuss it or anything.
Be good to say, I've driven by.
Right, yeah.
So we just disclose that at the beginning of the meeting or when we're doing conversation?
When you get to that item on the agenda, you just disclose after the vote.
We didn't really go over conflict of interest and when to declare that, or if you should show up to the hearing if you think there is one.
That's a good question. I mean, if it's a neighboring property, and particularly if you're against it, you probably shouldn't be voting.
Right. Or if it's a friend of yours that you know.
And you should declare that expert, or that relationship, and say, I'm going to recuse myself from participating in this hearing.
Would it be beneficial to bring that up to Colleen or staff beforehand? And if we do have enough people to still get to a quorum without you, but would it be just prudent to just not even attend that night?
I don't
or?
know that you should not attend, because if there are other things on the agenda,
Okay.
I think that it's probably more appropriate to show up, and then, especially if there is a quorum, and we do have 2 alternates, to be able to say, I have this relationship with the applicant, I will recuse myself from this. And don't participate in discussion, don't vote, and then we move one of the alternates into that voting position.
A voting spot,
Yeah.
okay.
The applicant signs my paycheck.
Yeah. Right,
Something like that, yeah.
Recuse myself.
or, it's your wife's, sister or something, it's, yeah.
Sure, yeah.
And if you let Colleen know that ahead of time, then we can help you navigate that.
Perfect.
Yeah, so that'll be easier to do. And we can start building that into your scripts and stuff.
Great.
When the hearing comes up.
So you can't get a charitable contribution from the applicant to your favorite charity or
Probably not. All right, do we have any other questions for our legal counsel tonight? Seeing none?
doing a good job.
Yes, thank you very much for all your help and all that. Appreciate it.
I hope I get to see you some more.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens with the city attorney process.
I'll call for a jury.
Thanks so much.
One, two, three.